Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to look at the 6.10 release. So this is quite a large release. Obviously it's got a lot of the system infrastructure changes, changes to FTP. So there'll probably be more information on that coming soon. In this video we're just going to be looking at the actual feature set in the admin for sites. So it is a big one, so we'll get started. And first up we have the ability to apply detail layouts on item create forms. So when you're submitting a front-end submitted module item, we can now identify in the form what detail layout you want to use. So in this example I'm showing here, I have a testimonials custom module, and this is set up to have multiple detail layouts. So under the properties, we have enabled multiple detail layouts, and we have multiple detail layouts. You can see here there's 3. So obviously when creating these items in the admin, you can choose which detail layout you want that item to use. But we couldn't make that selection when creating them on the front end. So now we can. So if we have a look at the page here, I've got set up a submission form for the custom module. So obviously we've got most of our fields here we can type out, and I'll just open that page up so we can see what that looks like. Okay, so we've got name, title, description, etc. And these are the items that are currently existing. So again, taking a look at the form code, there's a hidden field here with the name of detail layout ID. So that's what it's saying here in the release notes. Then obviously the value of that field is the ID of the detail layout. So you can see that in the URL bar or when you hover over the detail layout that you've created in the module settings. So just grab that ID, add that to the form, and then whenever that form's submitted, it will apply that detail layout. And I'll just do a quick submission here. CEO. Okay, and we create that item. So obviously I'm logged in at the moment, and that item should have been created. Okay, we can see an item of foo with my detail 2, which is what that ID referred to. Okay, so obviously you can enhance that with some sort of drop down if you want to populate multiple detail levels so that the user can select those. It doesn't have to be a hidden field, or you could programmatically determine that based on how they're coming to that form or other things that they've selected. So it's flexible in that regard. You don't have to just hard code that ID all the time. But yeah, that'll open up a few more possibilities for user-submitted items. Okay, next on the list we have secure to CartID and CRM member cookies. So this change probably won't really affect anyone in terms of functionality. It's just an upgrade to the cookies that are used to store the cart ID and the member auth. So they're just being made secure now so that they can only be transmitted over a HTTPS secure connection, just to avoid any man-in-the-middle attacks and manipulation to that information while it's being transferred. So essentially a security update, I assume. Next we have site information, or site globals as they're now called. So a heap of fixes and enhancements to this. So let's take a look at site globals under settings. So the first one is a date time field. So we did have a date field before, but it didn't include the time. So if we take a look at this one here, so this was set up as a date time type field, and previously we only had access to the date. But now, as you can see, we've got the time as well. So it just brings that in line with most other date time fields throughout the admin. The next one just relates to how the validation was occurring when you set up a new item, which I'll just create a new property. So we give it a name, for example, name, and we obviously have access to how we create the alias and the short alias. And previously, the validation here to check if that alias was already in use didn't take into account the groups that these were in. So you can see here we've got a short alias of N. And if I save that and then I went ahead and tried to create another property in a different group that also had a short alias of N, then it wouldn't allow that. But technically it should, because the full path, the full liquid path to that value is different. So now the validation looks at that, and we can have the same end value for the liquid tag as other groups have. Okay, and that was just a minor adjustment to the wording, or sort of a typo to the text field. The text multi-line, it had multiple instead of multi-line, so that was corrected. And also we have the ability to nest liquid into these site globals. So this is really handy if you want to include a site global within the value of another site global. So a typical example of that is creating like a block of contacts. So like we have here, you might want to have the individual controls for numbers, mobiles, emails, address, things like that. But when you're outputting that on the website, you don't want to have to select every single one of those little items to build that content information block. So we have here another property called content block. If we have a look at how this one's put together, we can see that it's a multi-line, so we have the ability to put some sort of code in here. And so we can add HTML, and we can insert additional site globals within that to build out a more structured thing. So now all we need to do is insert this property onto the page, and we get that whole structure output, rather than having to select all these individually and build it every time we want to output that. And just on that line of thinking, I'll jump just down to this third point here, which is another addition that's been added, HTML layouts for site globals. So it's a similar line of thinking, but not necessarily just for multi-line properties. I might open a different one just to show you this. So let's say we have a phone number, and obviously we just want the user to input a phone number here when they edit this. So we have just a text value and a phone number. But obviously on the front end, usually we're going to want that to be an active link, to open up a telephone link or something like that. So now we essentially have mini layouts that we can use, similar to how we were formatting the content block, but this is just for individual site globals. So you can see now, along with alias and short alias, we also have HTML alias and HTML short alias. And just appending underscore HTML to the liquid tag. And so down here, we have a layout field, and you can see we can put in code and HTML and that sort of thing. So in this case, you can see we've created an anchor tag, we've given it a tell link, and we're using liquid down here again because now we can nest liquid. And we're doing some manipulation or some filters to the phone number to remove the spaces, remove the brackets, to get that into a better format for the link. But we still want to then output the phone number again in its normal readable format. And now when we output that onto the front end, we can use the shortcodes or the alias with underscore HTML appended to the end to output whatever we've constructed here in the layout. So essentially you can output the value, the plain value, whatever that may be, a date, a string, or whatever it was, but then you can also output the layout that you've constructed. So really now we have the two options on how we output the site globals. So that'll save a lot of time with putting this information onto the page, and also if the client's doing this, they're not necessarily going to know to create links like this or how to format the content. So if they're able to just plug the HTML straight in, that's going to be a lot easier. So very similar to what we have in the shopping cart, where we have HTML output for certain buttons and add to cart buttons and things like that. So very similar concept to that. So yeah, just jumping back to these other two extra points here. The ability to shuffle items once added. So this is a fantastic option here because we desperately needed this to be able to just sort these into whatever order. Because once you created them, that was the order they were stuck in. If you added more, they just have to be at the end. And it wasn't really a good way to logically sort them. So now we can really move those around as we change the site and develop new globals. And the second one here is add a checkbox in the group level, determining whether the group's properties are added to the component toolbox or not. Okay, so when we edit the settings or create a new group, we can choose whether this displays in the toolbox, the pop-up toolbox, which I'll show in a second. So this basically allows you to create global properties that are more for the developer or the admin, and then global properties that are more for use in content management for the site content admins. So if we were looking on just a regular page, for example, or anywhere we have a content region, and we're looking in our component box under site globals. So when we look at the list here, we're only going to see items that have been ticked on to show up in here. So essentially we can hide some groups from displaying here. Okay, moving on, we have the Analytics dashboard allowing Google Data Studio, and it's now called Looker Studio. So if you're not familiar with Looker Studio, have a look at Google that and have a look. It's basically Google's tool for creating like a dashboard to pull in data from various data sources. They've got hundreds, if not thousands, and you can construct your own dashboard to visualize that data. So obviously helpful for website data, analytics, maybe if they're running AdWords or other campaigns or other third-party services that have some sort of analytics or just data that they like to visualize that relates to their website or the campaigns they're running through their website. So we can bring all that together now in a dashboard that you can totally customize through Looker Studio and then present that right into the Treepl dashboard. So if I head to my analytics dashboard here, you can see I have the Looker Studio embedded. And this is just a demo, like the default demo one that Google provides when you set up your Looker Studio. So this is grabbing the Google Search Console. So it's primarily for website analytics. But like I said, there's hundreds of other data sources that you can pull in and create graphs for and whatnot. Whatever is appropriate for your client, you can create a dashboard and put it right into the website admin. So it sits up here in the analytics, which of course is customizable on certain plans. So you can edit the layout and where that sits. Of course, all the other analytics are still available and will still be visible if you choose for them to be. I'll just quit that. So you can see as I scroll down, we've still got the other analytics. Mine's not showing data because I haven't got that connected, but you still have all those analytics as well. So the Looker Studio may not be for analytics at all. You may choose to use that for something entirely different. It's completely customizable within Looker Studio. This is really just an iframe that you're pulling in here. So yeah, if you're not familiar with Looker Studio and you think that might come in handy, I would suggest checking that out. It's quite a useful tool. While we're on this analytics dashboard, I'll just jump down to another feature. If I can find it, okay, here. So the Google Analytics Global Time Selector. So if we ignore the Looker Studio for now, previously we had individual date range selections here for each graph or each module that was here. So we can change this one to 14 days, we could change this one to 7, we change these all individually. But often if you're going to change, say, to a 30-day view, you probably want to see them all as a 30-day view. So we have a global period change or period selector. So right up the top here, got global time selector, and you can change that up here. And that will then update all of the graphs to be the same period of time. And just to note, that wouldn't affect the Looker Studio. That, as I said, that's quite a different embed. It's sort of its own reference. It's not really connected to the built-in analytics. Okay, so jumping back to where we're up to, create default JS validation. So JavaScript validation for forms, web forms. So previously there really wasn't any validation in terms of like front-end validation. There was definitely server-side validation, so once the form was submitted, it could come back with errors if there was missing fields or an incorrect email address format or something like that. But the problem with that is the form's already been submitted and the user would then have to redo the form in that case. Really, we want to give that user the information up front before the form submits so that they can correct any issues and submit the form once. So now we have some default front-end validation for forms. Okay, and I believe this isn't turned on by default. You opt into this validation when you create the form. So let's just say we're creating a new form, call it val. And in the form settings, we have enable default JavaScript validation. So if you want to use that, turn that on here. And basically what it's saying here is that if this is on and the form is rendered on a page, the validation scripts will be added to the page head. And if an element is not valid, it will add the class validation error to the element. And once it's valid, a class of validation success. So there probably isn't any default styling or anything around or messaging built into this, so that's obviously up to you as the front-end developer to style the elements based on those classes that are being provided, and no doubt you could use that to display little info messages under each field, indicating that a field is invalid. Okay, so to do a quick little demo of this, it's on the contact form here. I've got it set up. So I might inspect this so you can see the code. Okay, so if we look at this first name field here, it's obviously required. And I'm just going to try and submit the form without doing anything. And we can see we get a red required note here. As well as we can see a class of validation error has been added. And so the span here that has the required note in it is set up with some CSS to, so it's hidden by default, and then we have display block applied to it. Looking at the validation error class with a plus span error message. So it's looking for any error message span tag here that is a direct sibling to the input element. So if this gets a validation error, then this element will show based on the CSS styles here. So that's one way of setting up some little indicators there for the required fields using the built-in JavaScript validation. But you'd probably also want to highlight this element red as well, and things like that. Okay, moving to our next item here is to do with the file manager. So this is to do with showing the date and list view in the mini file manager, so not the full file manager. So when we're, say we're editing a page, I'll just go through here, and we open up our file manager here, we now have the ability to put it into list view, and also this list view, both here and in the full file manager, has the last modified date column, and we can sort by that header column as well. Okay, moving on to custom reports. So now we have a select all or deselect all option for the groups of fields. So when we are looking at our custom reports, I'm just going to create a new one here. So let's say we're looking for contacts and cases for a particular form. Save that. Now when we're looking at the fields, you can see we've got these groups of fields here. If we just wanted everything included, previously we would have to go through and manually click every single one. And if you have a big form that's using a lot of fields, there's a lot of properties to select, or in orders, there's a lot of properties that you may want selected. So now we can just tick the box at the top here to select all, or deselect. So that's obviously a nice little time-saving feature. Okay, next is the ability, or more of a fix, for the file upload on mobile devices. So I think previously there was some issues with uploading files into the file manager from a mobile device. So that should now work much more consistently. Okay, in custom modules we would typically have the downloadable option for media properties. So if we're looking at a custom module, say something that includes like images or files, let's look at the homepage banner here. So whenever you have a media property like this, you would have the downloadable file option underneath it, and that adds the URL parameter there to force that file to be downloaded if there's a link to it. However, this is not always the most understood by clients, I guess, or they may add this when it's not really needed, or you may have already factored that into the layouts and hard-coded that into the liquid layout. So adding it again can cause issues with how that's added. So it's probably more often the case that this isn't needed when creating module items, as opposed to when you would want it. So now we have the option of just turning that off in the module settings itself. Properties. So I believe when you add in a media property or edit one, you can now tick a box to display the downloadable checkbox. So in this case I'm going to actually turn that off because I don't want it. Because this is just a banner, it's not relevant for the user to have to even consider what that tick box is for. Okay, so we've saved that, go back to our edit page, and we can see that's just completely gone now. So it just removes a bit of clutter and confusion on that edit form. Okay, next on the list we have UX improvements. Now the list of system pages will show the template. So if we're looking at settings, system pages, we now can see what template is being used for those system pages. And in addition to that, we have the option to enable or disable system pages. So this is quite handy in terms of pages that just aren't going to be used for your site. You don't want them to be active. You don't want that URL able to be accessed or even be an entity on your site. So we can see in this case the quote has been disabled. So if you're not using quotes in your website, you can just come and disable those. So clicking in to edit this, we now can see there's an enabled tick box. And it just has a note here that if an item is disabled, it should just return a 404 page, as if it doesn't exist at all, which is what we want. Okay, moving on, we have the Google Analytics Time Selector, which I mentioned previously. Okay, and next we have another UX improvement for the global component builder and the global file manager. So previously we had icons above the content area for the file manager and for the components builder. These have now been moved to like this little sticky toolbar here. I might actually go to a page where there's a bit longer page to see this in full effect. So we can see that now that sort of sticks to the top there. So it's always accessible wherever you are, not just necessarily in the main content region. So a little bit more accessible. So again, it just pulls out from the side as it did before. So we've got our file manager and our components builder. Okay, and in addition to that, we now have keyboard shortcuts to open these up. So I'm on a Mac, so it's Shift-Command-F for the file manager. And again, to close it, or Shift-Command-C for components builder. And that just pulls that out as well. So I think it's, what have we got here? Shift-Control-C and Shift-Control-F on a Windows machine. And also, this is now accessible in more places throughout the admin as well. So I think where I was just before in the system pages, I'm not sure if we had that there before, but we have access to the file manager and the components builder in more places throughout the admin as well. So initially this was a little bit weird having this floating up here, but I think once you begin to use that in more places, you find it a little bit more accessible and you quickly get used to it being there. For example, you may want to add like a component or maybe even an image or a file path in a field, like a custom module field that's at a different place up the page rather than in the actual content region itself. So I think this is a little bit more flexible. Okay, so moving to the next item here, we have fields, columns added to the e-commerce gift voucher modules. So when we're looking under e-commerce, gift vouchers, so we have a few extra column headers here. The date purchased, the purchaser's name, order number, and a link to the order. So in this case, this was generated through the admin, but if this was a purchased gift voucher from the shopping cart, it would have an order number here, which would be a link that would click through to the actual order as well. So just linking those together. Okay, then we have the delete all items toggle for admin user roles. So obviously it's quite dangerous for admin users to come in and start deleting things, and we certainly don't want them to use the delete all in a lot of cases. So let's say we're looking at custom modules here, and under these three dots here we usually have the delete all items. Even though a warning comes up saying, are you sure you want to do this? Often users can still click through that and find themselves deleting everything. So in the admin users, under settings, so the admin user roles, when we're setting up a role for a particular admin, in most of these items now, you should see the option to delete all items. So this is going to be turned off, I believe, by default. Yep, so have it unchecked by default. So now by default, users won't be able to accidentally delete everything. But if you want to allow that sort of functionality, you can come in and turn that on for a particular user role. Okay, the next item is to do with custom modules. And when we mark the properties as mandatory, just giving us a more visual way of knowing which fields are mandatory or not. So when you're setting up a custom module, let's just actually, if we go into this one, and you're in the properties. So here we can see a whole bunch of properties, and previously we wouldn't know which ones were set as mandatory or not, or required. We would have to click into the edit field and check if they were set as mandatory. But now if they are mandatory, we now see the red asterisks against those. So at a glance, we should be able to see any of the properties if they're mandatory or not. Okay, and the next item relates to the same sort of settings. So the module item notes. So we have now the option to display the notes more prominently. So I think people are finding it that notes can kind of get hidden. Actually, I'll just go back to my properties, make sure there's some notes on one of these. So let's say we have, image to be 600 by 600. That's a little note you want to add, provide to the content manager, content admin. So when we're looking at the edit page, we have just this kind of little note icon. So if the admin knows to look for those notes, they can hover over and they'll see that. But generally, if they're not sort of actively looking for those, they might easily overlook that and not realize there's actually a note there for them to look at. So now what we can do is make that a little bit more obvious. So going in here. So now we can choose to display the note in line. So if I save that and have a look, now we're going to see that note always visible with the text showing underneath the field. So it's much clearer and much more noticeable and related to the item that they're editing. So the next item is adding the release and expiry dates to menu items. So obviously in most other items, the custom module items, system items, we have these release and expiry dates, which obviously can allow an item to go live or come off the site at certain times and dates. We can now apply that exact same functionality to menu items. So we might have a item here that is only for a promotional period, and we can now set a release and expiry date for that menu item to become active on the website. And next we have a few more adjustments to the user interface for the admin. Some of these I've talked about before, but we'll go over it here again. So firstly, we've got an add item preview icon to the top of the page. So if we're looking at, say, a page or a custom module, normally we would have had the preview icon here next to the URL. But often, as we can see here, we can collapse these headers and be working in different sections. And we might want to preview the page just from this edit page. And rather than trying to work our way back to this, having the icon up here, along with these other edit style icons, makes a bit more sense, I think, anyway. So we've got the edit, preview icon up the top here, which is a little bit more accessible. And the other 2 points here relate to the sticky component manager and file manager, which I touched on before. So again, that's just going to be more available throughout the admin in more areas, and because it's sort of sticky there at the side, it's more accessible depending on where you're working and where you need to access that content. I think somewhere where it wasn't previously accessible, it's things like system pages and system emails. And the point 3 here, along with that, we'll have the properties manager as well when we're in things like custom module layouts or form layouts, I think has it as well. So let's say we're in a layout here, and previously we would have had the properties, which we can pull up for all the different properties that might be related to that custom module. So that will be all wrapped up in that sticky menu as well. Okay, now we have create folder within image media manager. Okay, so basically the ability to add a folder within the image manager, and we're talking about the image manager that we can pull out from the side drawer here. So obviously we can create folders in the main file manager, but we couldn't really work too much with the file manager in this preview. It was really just for selecting files. Now we have much more control with working with the files as well and creating folders and files, things like that. So now we have this blue plus icon down the bottom, where we can add a new folder or upload new, just like we can in the main file manager. So we can create that folder there. Okay, next we have in the custom properties for custom modules, just a rename of the text string to single line text. So this just sort of makes things a little more consistent and easier to work with. So if we go to our properties, so we can see this. So this is single line text. So before we had a few, we had the text multi-line and text string. So having these start with a different letter makes them a little bit easier to navigate to via the keyboard. If we're coming into this menu, we can hit S and it will bring us straight to that first item starting with S, which happens to be the single line. And likewise with the multi-line, it brings us a bit closer to that one. So the more common properties that you might be using. And I think it just makes a little bit more sense as well. Okay, and so there's a bit of a fix here for a sort of a strange issue that was happening with, I guess, admin login timeout. So if you're in the admin for quite a while, I think it particularly happened if you're working in multiple different admins. So I think there was some issue with the login token being refreshed or getting confused or, I don't know, overloaded or something with other sessions that you have going. So you would find yourself working away, hitting save, and suddenly your session is not valid anymore or is timed out or something like that. So the page would refresh. Because you logged out, the changes wouldn't save and you would lose any work that you hadn't been able to save prior to that timeout issue. So I think now the fix looks like perhaps it's a longer refresh time, and also the admin is set to save any changes you make to a session storage in the browser. And then so if the token expires and the page has to perform that reload operation, then it'll retrieve any of your unsaved work from the session storage in the browser and restore it to the form or the edit page that you're currently working on. So from my understanding, this works mainly in like edit pages, like if you're working in a custom module item. So for example, working away in here. So I think anything that you change in here will be saved into a session storage in case it needs to be restored. Likewise with pages and things like that. So yeah, hopefully that sort of resolves those issues that a lot of us were seeing with that session timeout. Okay, we have a feature flag change. So currently under the beta features, it's actually still in here, but I believe this item here, site load speed improvement, which has been under development for a little while now, will be moving behind the scenes, so it'll probably be turned on by default for 6.10 when that rolls out fully, but it looks like it's still going to be behind a flag, so I guess you could request that to be turned back off if you needed to, but I think in general it's pretty stable and is more of an improvement for most sites anyway. So basically that looks like that's going to be applied by default. And then also in the admin, here's an interesting one, an internet connection checker. So basically if you're working away in the admin and you lose connection in the background, the admin will alert you of that. So we can actually demo that a little bit by inspecting the page. And in our network, we can go offline and we can see straight away red notifications come up there saying no internet connection. So yeah, just a handy little notification in case you go offline and you try and save something and you lose some work because of that. Up next we have the liquid date formatting issue fix. This is a little bit of an obscure sort of issue, probably not really going to affect most people, I would imagine. It was just a bit of an issue with how the liquid date filter was interpreting 12 AM and 12 PM and applying zeros or something like that. But it's all in detail here if you want to read through that. But Basically, there's a fix to just make it work how it was meant to work, because it currently was kind of like a bug. And I believe, from what I see here, it's probably going to be behind a flag, so a beta feature to begin with, just in case it's really affecting one of your sites or something like that. You can turn it on or off depending on what needs to happen. But I think in most cases that's going to be fine. Okay, so moving on from that one. Improved workflow, ascending logic based on plan restrictions. So this is just a bit of a tidy up, I guess, of the logic with workflows and custom workflow notifications and emails. Essentially, if you downgrade a plan or change the plan in a way that affects how custom workflows are implemented. So if you have custom workflows in place, which are only available, I think, on the Pro, or there's a sort of a mix between Business and Pro, depending on workflows and custom workflow emails and things like that. So depending on what's in place and how you downgrade, there's a bit of a table here explaining all the conditions, but it will try to gracefully degrade, basically. So if you had a custom workflow, it would default to the single workflow. So without just basically breaking the whole workflow system altogether, it's going to try and gracefully degrade, basically. So yeah, if you think that's going to affect you, have a read through the logic here just to get a better understanding on how that works and what the consequences of downgrading might be. But there's also going to be some checking as well. If you have those workflows in place and the site's been downgraded, there will actually be some notifications and warning labels and things there telling you that those workflows won't actually work or are forbidden for that particular plan. Just to give you more information about what's breaking there or is a potential issue. Okay, another admin UI improvement for when there's empty tables. Let's see in the CRM, maybe we've got, there's no event bookings. Yeah, so if we go somewhere where there's normally a list of things or items, but there's none currently in place, rather than just having an empty table, just displaying more of a notification that there's nothing, no data there. I guess to avoid that sort of looking like maybe something's broken, or you're expecting to see a list of items, but there's like an empty table, or you might think there's some filtering that's been applied or something like that. Just making it more clear that there's actually no data here to display. Okay, now we come to the file system changes here to do with FTP and the case sensitivity of the file system. Because they're moving to a new file system, it's now case sensitive, whereas before it was case insensitive. So basically meaning if you had, let's say, a file that was all in lowercase, but you linked to it in the code of your page using some capital letters in instances, maybe you made it total case or something like that, it would still work. The case was insensitive. It didn't matter if you had the wrong case somewhere, it would still match up with a different case. But now moving, I guess, to more standard or best practice in regards to the case of the file system, it's now case sensitive. So having a capital letter in a file name is different to having all lowercase in the same file name. So obviously that could cause a lot of issues if they just simply changed it, but there's big effort being made with the migration to automatically correct as many of those cases as possible, even within Liquid, and as many places that the system can sort of reach. So there's a bit of information here on what's sort of happening and some examples on how it's changing, particularly around pages and how FTP interacts with creating pages. There is actually a documentation article created as well. I'll just bring that up quickly. So here under the About Treepl CMS, under the file system documentation, so there's quite a lot of notes in there about how that's going to work, how that's changing. just to give you a better understanding of that, and just to be aware basically of the best practice and how you should approach that going forward. So again, over here it talks about some of the liquid tags that will be automatically fixed. So you have a read through that. A few more examples. So even with your header references, script files, CSS files, image paths, they'll all be corrected. See, then goes into a lot more detail about the system needs to maintain sort of a sync between the HTML pages that are created, particularly with FTP being uploaded via FTP, how they're synced to the actual CMS, and so the CMS recognizes those as pages and can render those. But moving into 6.10, that will all happen automatically and be controlled by the admin in the most part, I think. So it's really just the migration from 6.9 to 6.10 that hopefully this is going to cover most of those cases. But probably good just to be aware of that, so that if some sort of issue occurs, you're going to be able to identify that as that being the cause and know where and how to fix that. Okay, and then just finally here at the end, there's a note about, particularly if you are making heavy use of FTP and storing the website locally, working on the website locally, probably a really good idea once the 6.10 has been rolled out is that you go and get a fresh copy of all those FTP files, because a lot of them will have been changed in terms of the case of the file names and path names. So just a note there to make a fresh backup copy. Okay, and then there's a link there to that documentation that I was referencing as well. Okay, and then there's an Angular 15 refactoring. So I think that's the admin. Basically it works on Angular, and that's just having a update. With that, I think we're getting some new datetime pickers, so they look a little bit different. If I can quickly just just jump to an event, that'll be a better example. So if we've got a date time picker field, you can see it's a little bit different to the current one. Essentially it works mostly the same, probably overall a little bit nicer and cleaner, I think, once you get used to just the change of it all. And so it also looks like there's some clearing of styles when pasting into the WYSIWYG, which was also always a bit of an issue, particularly with content coming from Word documents and things like that. So I think that's sort of clearing out those Word-based styles a lot better than it was before, or at least giving you the option. Okay, next one is to do with the event calendar, and this basically gives you the option of using URL parameters to directly link to a year or a month in the calendar, or both. I think I have an example of this one, event calendar. So just like before, you'd be pulling in the event calendar with an include, which you can configure that through the components manager. Take a look at that page. Okay, so by default, we're going to arrive on the current month and year, but there are times when you may want to link someone directly to a future event or a past event, so we can use these URL parameters to adjust that. So let's take this year one. Now I do think last time I checked this it was not yet working, so we'll see what happens here, but basically the idea is you put in the URL parameter for the year, and then equals the year that you want it to go to. So if this works, it should take us to 2021 in the calendar. Okay, so that's worked, and obviously it's kept us on the current month. So if we only specify the year, it's going to keep us on the current month. And then of course we could specify the month as well, and hit enter, and we can see that it's updated the month there as well. Okay, next back to some more improvements for the file manager. In this case we've got move file and move folder. So this one I personally think is a pretty dangerous option to have and to allow for clients to play with, because clients may just think that they're cleaning up their file system, but they're going to break almost every link in their site. So use this one with caution, or train your clients on this one with caution. But basically, under the three-dot menu, we now have move to, so we can move this entire folder somewhere else just by navigating the file structure. And that same goes for any individual files as well. We can move those. So very, very nice feature to have, particularly for developers and more tech-savvy admin users, but also a very dangerous one. Okay, pagination refactoring. So this is to rework the pagination in the admin. So when we're looking at, say, custom modules or anything with a list that has a lot of items, I might go back to my pages. So we can see here, if we reduce this down to 20, so we've got some pagination occurring here because we've got more than 20 items. So if you have a lot of items in your modules, I think what was happening before is the system would have to load in all those items in order to then paginate them. So it was probably using a JavaScript pagination of some sort. So I believe now it's using more of a server-side pagination. So it's not actually having to load in all those items at once, so making the admin smoother and faster. And I also believe that where it's adding pagination to a few areas that didn't actually have pagination before, so they were just showing the complete list. So templates, mailing lists, email campaigns, and admin users. Okay, next we have system emails. Now sorted A to Z. Okay, so under email notifications, system emails, these are now alphabetized, and it's also a note there that we've got a templates column. So again, showing what email template is applied to each of those system emails. All right, next up, we just have a name change to some of the buttons, just to standardize the add or create button. I think in some locations it had add, where you'd go to create a new page or item. So up here, something like this. So now they all should say create. Use that wording create, rather than some locations saying add. Okay, and again in these types of list views for our modules, I think there was an issue with the search here that it was case sensitive. So if you weren't searching for the exact case match on the keyword, it wouldn't result in a match. So now it's in case insensitive, so it doesn't matter if you use up or a lowercase, it's still going to find that match. And lastly, we have email data widget improvement. So what this is referring to is sort of properties panel that you can bring up to insert liquid tags or properties within an email layout. So specifically things like the workflow email, follow-up email, abandoned cart, notification emails. So if we take a look at the workflow email, and I believe in this case it's referring to like custom workflow emails, so ones that you would create yourself. So yeah, normally we had the properties box here, which is now of course in the sticky menu. So email data, and basically shows you the liquid objects or liquid tags we can use in this specific email layout. And so if you're making follow-up emails or whatnot, it will bring up specific email objects that are available for those particular types of emails. Okay, and here we come to the bug fixes. So as normal, I'll let you read through those yourself. I don't think there's any super critical ones that I would point out to make you aware of. Okay, so hope you enjoy 6.10, looking like a good release. Okay, thank you very much.